Every once in a while, there'll be a cartoon that breaks out of its intended audience. While most of these shows are made with the intention of appealing to kids, on some rare occasions, a series will achieve more than that, become universally acclaimed and appealing to kids and adults alike. The Owl House is a recent example of this phenomena, along with Gravity Falls and Avatar as some more classic cases. In order to achieve this level of quality, risks need to be taken. Whether it's in the stories you tell, the jokes you make, or just the overall quality of the show, bringing a series to that level requires a certain degree of ambition. But that ambition can also backfire very easily. Wakfu is a French cartoon based on a video game of the same name. It was always one of my favorite shows growing up. I remember loving the characters and world and the sheer whimsy of it all. But recently I got around to watching the third season of Wakfu, and what I saw was really surprising. The show had a much darker, more serious tone. It attempted to take its characters in new, never-before-seen directions, and the villain was by far the most complex and sympathetic of the whole show. But despite all of these attempts to raise this series to even greater heights, I think overall I enjoyed the season less than either of its predecessors. It was undoubtedly ambitious, but unfortunately in this case, that didn't end up working out for the show. I think that the difference between Season 3 and the previous seasons is a really interesting example of how trying to appeal to everyone can sometimes fail to appeal to anyone. So let's walk through exactly how this show drops the ball. There are a couple things that change between Season 2 and 3, but I'm going to focus on what I think is the most important difference, the character writing. I think that the main characters are one of the biggest appeals of Wakfu overall. Their designs and personalities are all super distinct, and despite not being the deepest for most of the show, they're charming both individually and as a group. They have that very universal kids main party appeal, where you always find yourself rooting for Yugo and his friends to triumph. They have some small arcs that they go on individually. Ruel, for example, gets a lot more likable as time goes on. Dali gets a bit more mature and less childish, and Amalia stops acting as spoiled. But aside from a couple linear and basic bouts of character growth, the main party remains fairly static throughout the show. The OVA that takes place after Season 2 starts to dabble in more complex character drama, where the show finally starts to acknowledge the feelings Yugo and Amalia have for each other, and Yugo and Adamai's fight actually has lasting consequences that extend into Season 3. However, since the OVA is pretty short and plot-driven, it doesn't really delve into the characters as much as it could. But in Season 3, all of that changes. The characters are each given flaws and issues that they have to come face to face with as the season goes on. They're more serious and goal-oriented and have conflicts with each other as much as they do with the main villain. And speaking of that villain, Oropo, the main antagonist of the season not only poses a physical threat to the main party, but also represents a personal ideological challenge to both Dali and Yugo. Overall, the line between good and evil is a lot blurrier in this season than in any of the previous ones. Echo and a lot of the other demigods are kind to the main party, and Oropo's objectives actually seem like they'll make the world a better place. So then why does all of this fall flat? This probably seems like an objective improvement over the previous season's characters. Yugo, Amalia, Ruel, Dali, and a plethora of side characters all have so much more emotion and depth. How could that be a bad thing? Well, to understand what I mean, I'd first like to go through these characters I just mentioned and explore the arcs they go on, and how in my opinion, the way the characters find resolution is such a disappointment. So going in order from least to most interesting in my opinion, let's look at Ruel's long-awaited backstory. Up until Season 3, Ruel's kind of been a kitchen sink of backstory and character traits. Whenever there needs to be a new bit of lore for an episode, the safest bet is usually to tack it onto Ruel, since he's old and mysterious enough that anything is possible. They've never really used the character for anything serious. He's a money-grubbing old man, and despite still being a good person, his past is played for laughs more often than not. But in Season 3, the writers finally decide to do something interesting with his backstory. We learn that Ruel has a wife, one that he clearly still has feelings for, but who we've never seen in the main show up until now. Upon their reveal, we're left to speculate as to what could have happened between Ruel and Arpagon, especially since Ruel seems so uncharacteristically emotional about her. From what we know about Ruel's character, it's almost a certainty that he was the one that made a mistake and lost her. Despite being well-intentioned, Ruel is still obsessed with money in a way that is often to the detriment of those around him. And even though he does care about his friends and companions, you never really know where his priorities will lie when the chips are down. When you finally get a glimpse into their backstory, Ruel and Arpagon's marriage fits right into place with Ruel's personality. As you'd expect, Ruel chose money over their love. Arpagon gave Ruel her entire fortune, literally handing him her heart, and he ran away. This was really exciting to me as it gave Ruel a chance to confront his longest-standing character flaw. As I said before, he'd shown growth through the show by putting his friends first and proving that he cares about them, but his obsession with money still had a tendency to put those around him as a second priority at times. Being forced to confront the love of his life who he abandoned for riches should have given him a chance to face his demons and overcome his greed. But somehow, despite how well this character arc was set up and how perfect it was for Ruel's character, this story wasn't paid off even a little. When Ruel and Arpagon finally come face to face, Arpagon is one-sidedly obsessed with Ruel and wants to make him the Anatroph god so they can be together forever. Ruel doesn't have to beg for forgiveness, he doesn't have to face his flaws, he offers a blanket apology and kisses her, and all seems to be forgiven. That's such an anti-climax for this character arc. Even just giving Arpagon a moment to be angry at Ruel and forcing him to face the consequences of his actions would have been something. But no, she's head over heels obsessed with him despite being abandoned and treated as a second priority. Having Ruel come face to face with one of his unquestionably worst mistakes and come out of it as the hero is such an unbelievable misstep. She just holds him captive for a bit and eventually lets him go like nothing happened. This is why I said that Wakfu's ambition ended up hurting the show in the end. The attempt at giving Ruel a moment of self-reflection and character growth is actually worse than doing nothing with how poorly it was concluded. Setting up Arpagon's story with Ruel and then not forcing Ruel to face the music actually makes me like Ruel less as a character. And unfortunately, that's going to become a bit of a commonality throughout the season. Despite having a fairly basic and linear progression through the show, Dali has always been one of my favorite characters. He starts off as this unfathomably inept character who excels in fighting and literally nothing else. It was to the point that it actually made him completely unlikable. But throughout the show, he eventually evolves into a very sensible himbo. He's strong, he likes to fight, and he's fiercely loyal to his friends and his partner Ava. And honestly, that's pretty much all I needed from this character. Sometimes it's better to settle for a simple but fun personality rather than trying to burden this type of character with a lot of drama. But with that said, I was still really excited for the arc Dali was supposed to go on in Season 3. In the OVA, Dali discovers that he's an incarnation of the Yop god, and that his former master, Gultard, is actually his son. It's complicated. Dali then goes on to marry Ava and have 2 kids with her. In his nightmare at the start of Season 3, it's shown that despite his usual lack of complex thought, Dali actually harbors a lot of guilt about being a former god. He sees visions of his family hating him, accusing him of abandoning his previous children and spouses, questioning whether they're actually special or if they're just the most recent of Dali's families. I really can't overstate how perfect of a burden this is to give to Dali. It's deeply emotionally troubling without being too complex, and it makes total sense how someone as dedicated and loyal as Dali would start questioning everything over this. Having to see visions of his wife demanding answers for all the other women he's been with in other reincarnations, it's no wonder he's as rattled as he is through the first few episodes of this season. And seeing him have to think about this stuff makes me like Dali more as a person. It shows he's not just a mindless fighting machine, he's capable of self-reflection and guilt. And I even think the writers had a really good idea for how to resolve this arc too. Gultard, one of Dali's children in a previous life, gets taken over by an evil alter ego and becomes one of the demigods the heroes have to face in the tower. Dali insists on fighting Gultard alone, forcing himself to confront the child he abandoned long ago and all of the resentment that's built up from that. There's even this really good line from Gultard's evil self, who professes that Gultard feels genuine hatred for Dali for all of the things that were done to him. But unfortunately, that's where all the good stuff ends. Dali and Gultard have a fight which ends when Dali punches Gultard stronger than Gultard can punch him, and suddenly he's back to normal. And that's kinda that. Dali doesn't really reflect further on his mistakes, Gultard doesn't express any of his feelings towards Dali himself, they kinda just move on. And again, just like Ruel, I start to like Dali a little less because of this. He's not a bad character for the rest of the show, he's kinda just normal again. No more self-reflection or guilt. His big emotional resolution was beating up the son he abandoned. I'd rather they just didn't try. Just a quick thing I want to mention here, Ava is supposed to be one of the main characters of the show. She's pretty vocal in the first 2 seasons, but here she just isn't. She gets kidnapped early on by the bad guys who want to make her unborn son the next Yop god. So it kind of makes sense why the villains only value her for her child, but it almost feels like the writers forgot to make her a character outside of that too. She doesn't have any arc she goes on, and she's way different from how she's characterized in previous seasons. During the final battle, when everyone else is fighting the literal final boss Oropo, Ava, Flipan, and Elili are all fighting Sifo the Changeling, a minor antagonist from the OVA. Like, the entire rest of the cast is off risking their lives to save the world, and the writers chose to let Ava sit out. I just think that's a bad way to use such an amazing character. Yugo has 2 main character arcs in this story. The more complex and central one is a bit less interesting to me, so I'll talk about that one first. In the OVA directly before this season, Yugo uses the 6 Elitrope Dofus to beat the big bad of the story, Ogrest. He does this despite his brother Adamai's warnings, who ends up leaving Yugo out of anger. While we didn't know this happened in the OVA itself, it turned out that Adamai was right, and that Yugo using the Dofus in that way had a terrible side effect. It created copies of himself, which were scattered to the dawn of time, a different race known as the Eliotropes. These beings shared Yugo's memories and feelings, however had a diminished lifespan and were doomed to die out before their original ever did. The main villain of the season is one of those creations, who harnessed the power of the Ilia Cube to survive up until this point. Throughout this season, Yugo was forced to face the mistake he made in birthing an entirely new and fragile race, one that was doomed to die out at their inception. If you didn't catch on to it already, that's kind of a theme of this season, the folly of the gods. All of the villains are demigods who were abandoned or mistreated by their parents. The main villain, Oropo, is another example of that, and Yugo and Dali both have to confront their children and face the mistakes they made. Again, on paper, this is a really cool idea. The theme is something really important to the entire plot of the season and to two very central main characters, possibly more. Having a cohesive theme is something that the first two seasons never really even attempted. But despite how good this idea looks, it's once again bungled in the execution. In the first half of the season, we see how much all of these demigods love Oropo. They trust him with their life, and in some cases are even head over heels for him. Even Yugo's brother, Adamai, is on Oropo's side, and it really gives you and Yugo the impression that he's actually in the wrong, and that Oropo is actually the good guy in all of this. Except, at the very end of the show, it's revealed that Oropo's entire plan hinges on destroying the world, which makes him the bad guy, obviously. Oropo's stated plan was to have his demigod friends take the place of the gods, a plan which honestly seems pretty solid by the time we get to the finale. Through their inaction in season 1 and 2, the gods have basically proven they don't care about mortals, and replacing them with some very sensible demigods who have things they want to do for the benefit of the others seems like a good plan. And if this had been Oropo's plan, the villains would have taken on a very morally light gray complexion, and Yugo would have been the bad guy. And that would have been very, very interesting, but of course they couldn't commit to something that intense. Instead, Oropo is revealed to have this plan to wipe out all mortals along with the gods, and suddenly he locks up all of his friends and betrays them. I understand that for a kids show, you can't really make Yugo the bad guy. He has to be in the right somehow. My issue is that this conclusion seems to absolve Yugo of almost all of his guilt. He beats up Oropo and suddenly Yugo doesn't have to answer for any of his mistakes, because Oropo is just the bad guy. And as long as the bad guy loses, Yugo has done his job. I found Oropo's death to be really tragic. The entire season he was a very sympathetic character who was forced to live in the shadow of his creator, a creator that never seemed to show real regret for his actions. He gathered up a bunch of people who shared his goals and aspirations and formed real, genuine connections with them. And if his plan didn't include destroying the world, his friends would have done anything for him. And in the end, even over revenge and finally achieving his goal, he chooses to give up on his plan and to die alone with the person he loves rather than hurting the people who put so much trust in him. It's a really touching conclusion. And just like before, this makes me like Yugo less. Adamai joins his team again at the end, and so do all of the other demigods that used to condemn him, and suddenly Yugo's in the right for everything. I think there is a world where they could have made Oropo betray everyone like this and still have Yugo take accountability for his actions. But unfortunately, in this season, he doesn't. He gets to walk away as the hero just like he always has. I have so much respect for the decision to make the heroes flawed. I love how Dali and Yugo's mistakes have direct relations to the villains. But you can't do that without making them take accountability. You can't play things out halfway and then paint them as heroes once they punch their foes hard enough. The last character arc I want to talk about is a joint one, the love story between Yugo and Amalia. These two characters have been pretty consistently built up as having feelings for each other, with the topic finally being broached in the OVA right before this season. But despite acknowledging that they both want to be together, they can't. And the reason for this and the way their relationship progresses is actually really well done in my opinion. Yugo is an Iliotrope, and thus has an extremely long life. He'll spend more years looking like a child than some races will even spend alive. So even though in age he's a full-grown adult, he still has the appearance of someone way younger. Also, can I just say that I love that the characters age naturally and aren't still children? Yugo is 21 by the third season and Dali's 25. And it's so refreshing to have a main party that's actually a bit older, even if they don't act like it sometimes. Anyways, even though mentally Yugo and Amalia are pretty much the same age, Yugo still looks like a child, and he's extremely self-conscious of that fact. He strongly believes that because of his appearance, he'll never be able to give Amalia the relationship she wants, so he tries to stop anything from happening between the two of them. I love how deeply complicated and heartbreaking this topic is. The idea that these two people have such strong feelings for each other but can't act on them because of internal circumstances neither of them have power over. And to a point, I like how Yugo is kind of in the right. Amalia says that she loves Yugo no matter what and wants to be with him, but the show makes it clear that she also wishes he looked older. In the time bubble when Yugo gets temporarily aged up, the way Amalia looks at him makes it clear that she feels some type of way about that. And near the end of the show, when Oropo approaches her, she doesn't reject his advances because he looks like an older version of Yugo. This makes it clear that on top of Yugo being self-conscious about his age, some part of Amalia also wishes he looked older, which kind of puts Yugo in the right for not wanting to start anything, since it's awful to be in a relationship where your partner wants you to look differently than you actually do. In this regard, I actually think the way their relationship is handled is very realistic, and I didn't expect it from the show. I never thought I'd see drama and romance between this main cast. My issue with this character arc, despite it being realistic, is that it does make me like Amalia way less as a character. I think Yugo is thoroughly reasonable in how he handles stuff with Amalia in this season. He does his best to avoid opening things with her, especially with his friends' lives on the line. And even when they both kiss in the heat of the moment, he tries to make sure they stay on good terms after the fact. But on the other hand, the way Amalia acts is pretty questionable at best. She's very rude to Yugo and doesn't seem to have the self-awareness to understand that she's also not ready for that relationship. And whenever characters call her out on this or bring it up, she gets upset and holds it against them. I don't think that this is an unreasonable way to act. If anything, I think it's very realistic, but in a way that's uncomfortable and hard to watch. And this all comes to a head at the end of the season when she finally meets with Oropo. As soon as the two meet, Oropo kisses Amalia, which she doesn't seem to take issue with. And I can give her a pass for that, since she's still confused on if Oropo is Yugo or not. But even when Yugo appears and confronts Oropo, Amalia takes his side for some reason. Like, she clings to him and tries to convince Yugo to hear Oropo out when she's supposed to have feelings for Yugo. And that's such a messed up thing to do to the person you're supposed to have feelings for. The only point where she finally got back to being on Yugo's team is when Echo reveals that Oropo wants to destroy the world. Then suddenly she thinks he's a monster despite taking a side just a moment prior. Then after coming to her senses, Amalia condemns Oropo and says something or the other about Yugo being better. As if Amalia's resolving Yugo of any and all blame when she's the one who had just been in the wrong a few moments ago. Maybe it's cynical of me, but I feel like Amalia got off way too light for how she acted at the end of the show. Yeah, eventually she came around, but the fact that she was almost on Oropo's side and didn't raise a finger against him for like 2 whole episodes really doesn't sit right with me. I think that Yugo deserved a chance to sort through his feelings about Amalia after the main plot wrapped up, and I think he was really in the right when he said that Amalia cared too much about her own pain to consider anyone else's circumstances. What makes all of this worse is that in the past seasons of the show, I could feel the chemistry between them. They were really cute together, and I was always rooting for them to end up as a thing. But suddenly in this season, all of that charm seems to vanish. And that doesn't just go for Amalia and Yugo. Pretty much all of the main characters feel a lot more mean than they usually do. Except Dally, he's still great. The whole appeal of the main party was how well they mesh together. As a group, they can butt heads occasionally and have their differences, but they all genuinely enjoy adventuring together and being in each other's presence. But that feeling is gone in this season. The characters are more mature, sure, but they also never feel like they're having fun anymore. The lighthearted banter from the previous seasons is replaced with bickering and arguing, and it just gets hard to watch. Like seeing a group of friends who all enjoy hanging out with each other slowly start to drift apart. Throughout most of the season, Ellie was by far my favorite character. She's the only one who retained some spark of joy and wonder, and she pretty much single-handedly propels the party forward in the first half of the arc. But aside from her, Ruel's so much more lazy and complains all the time, Amalia acts more spoiled and stuck up than ever, and Yugo just seems so tired. And again, it's not in a way that feels unrealistic, it's just not fun to watch anymore. It's like all of the characters' worst traits got dialed up to 11. Season 3 of Wakfu is clearly trying to appeal to older audiences who may have grown up watching the first 2 seasons. But in doing so, it writes a show that's honestly for no one. The show does all of these things to be more mature and more adult and feel more serious, but it never works, because it's bowling in 2 lanes at the same time. It's trying to be mature while also being written by people who have no clue how to take it there. And the result is a mess of a season. The show feels like it was written by someone who just doesn't understand kids media. The first 2 seasons had their occasional lowbrow humor customary of a kids show, but somehow it's even more present in season 3. Like, some episodes are filled to the brim with stuff that wouldn't even appeal to a 10-year-old. But then at the same time, the show does all of these things to try and project itself as being more adult. It has some adult jokes, characters are clearly trying to be more mature, and you have all of that, and then they dedicate an entire episode to fighting a demigod who collects underwear. It just feels atonal. I really like Wakfu. Despite all of what I just mentioned, the show really does have a special place in my heart as one of my favorite shows growing up. But I can't help but look at this season as anything more than a misstep. I think my fondness for the season as a teenager came from a recognition of a lot of these character arcs. Even though I was really young, I could definitely tell that this season tried a lot of new things, but I don't think I was mature enough to notice how poorly they were handled. I will always love Wakfu for what it is, and I think this season is packed full of interesting ideas. I just wish they were executed in a way that actually paid them off. Thank you so much for watching.